Welcome the director, Robert Kenner. Very fun. So, Robert, a doctor testifies that a candle fell over in a baby's crib and set the baby on fire. Why does no one think, let's arrest the parents who put a lit candle in a baby's crib?
Well, not only one group of parents, I mean, not one set of parents.
Three.
Multiple parents. That seemed to be, I thought that was great that the Tribune writers, Trish and Sam, they were thinking, wait a second, what kind of a parent puts a candle? It's a strange thing, but ultimately it's this sort of selling of doubt.
Well, it's a great piece of investigative journalism that comes of that, but the fact that it took that much suggests that there's a lack of critical thinking going on, that people can hear this testimony and not question that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to begin with, there's so little investigative reporting that Sam and Trish took 2 years to uncover this story and to find out that Dr. Heimbach ultimately was making up this tale. And right now, we have fewer and fewer reporters and more PR representatives. Something like 4.5 PR reps to every reporter. We were at Columbia Journalism School last week, and just amazed how those investigations are dwindling as we go.
So this is based on a book just like Food Inc. was. How exactly do you adapt a book into a documentary? It must not be the same as a narrative where you translate the story.
Well, in a funny way, we were inspired by this book, but it wasn't really what became the movie. The book is a great, really important book, sort of outlining what you see in Naomi Oreskes' story here, which is the idea that it was the ideology of Fred Singer and Fred Seitz, two very legitimate scientists, who gave cover to these PR guys like, Steve Malloy and Mark Morano. It took those legitimate scientists to add cover. That was their contribution in that book. But in a funny way, we had to figure out how to create the present tense aspect of the film. And one of the things that helped inspire it was during the making of Food Inc., I went to a hearing on whether to label cloned meat. I didn't know there was such a thing as cloned meat. And when someone from the meat industry stood up and said, I don't think the public should have that information. It would be too much of a burden. It would be way too confusing. I thought something's wrong. And we looked into it, and it turned out to be groups like Citizens for Consumer Freedom, who were funded by the fast food industry, who were out there to deny us that kind of information. And as we looked into it more, they also attacked Mothers Against Drunk Driving, because he defended the alcohol industry, and then he also attacked the Humane Society because it was factory farming. And then that was this guy, Richard Berman, who then went on to the next big payday, which is oil and gas.
So was the idea of the analogy of a magic trick something from the book or something that came to you for the film?
That came sort of halfway through the film. We just kept thinking, how are these guys doing this? For 50 years they created doubt around tobacco when there was no doubt. Peter Sparber was out there convincing people that it wasn't the cigarette that causes house fires, it was couches. Maybe we need police to start escorting these couches across state lines because they spontaneously explode. That makes the candle look like nothing. And he was really good at it. They were great at it. I don't know, it just went on, and there were those great stories. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting actually what you just asked me.
The analogy of the magic.
Yeah, so as we were going, we realized these guys are magicians. And slowly, if you say it enough times, you realize, hey, why don't we get a magician to figure out how it's done? And there were those great parallels where Steve Malloy, who's unfortunately talked to us for months. We flew to Washington and he backed out at the last second, but he's on Glenn Beck and he says, Glenn Beck says, are you in bed with Big Oil? And if so, how good are they in bed? And Steve Malloy says, no, I'm just trying to do the right thing. Well, he's being paid huge amounts of money by oil and coal industry, and he's pretending to be an independent, source, trying to figure out what's really happening. And that's what Jamie Ian Swiss, the magician, says, in the three-card Monte. You need someone to win to give confidence. That's sort of what these guys are doing by pretending they're independent.
I want to ask the audience, by show of hands, how many people came to this movie already believing in climate change? That's most of the audience. So how do we, those of us here and those of us watching the movie, reach the true deniers of climate change?
Well, I don't think we're going to reach the true deniers of climate change necessarily, and I don't think that's the goal. I think the goal of this film is to, sort of help make the media or help get the media to not present this as a debate when it's not a debate. That we have to, we're not they're presenting these guys as if they're scientific skeptics when they're PR deniers who are out to just work like lawyers to confuse the situation. So I think as, the public is, confused because the information they're getting is confusing. And hopefully that will start to rectify itself. And I think it's starting to happen. But we need to really be much clearer. There are groups like TakePart.com/doubt and Forecast the Facts that are starting these media campaigns to stop calling these guys skeptics when they're deniers, to get people off the op-ed pages when they're pretending to be independent sources. So we can go help rectify that and present the real information, because the real debate is what do we do about it? And their conservative ideas and their liberal ideas, but it's not a debate about science on climate change any more than the Earth is round, the Earth is flat.
Now that Mark Morano has been exposed, has he ended his crusade?
Well, in his mind, he probably doesn't think of himself as being exposed. I don't think he'll be unhappy with the film necessarily.
Was he game to participate in the film?
Oh, I didn't trick him in any way. He knew I was making a film, and I would let him have his say. And he more than had his say. And he's quite charming, quite funny, and thoroughly entertaining to be with. It just, his words come out with a great consequence, and we had to juxtapose those words with what happened to those scientists.
We can take questions from the audience if anyone has them. Just raise your hand, and I'll keep scanning the audience from where I could. I see a lot. On the side?
Yeah, I'm watching it, and what I want to say first is this is a wonderful film and something that I hope everybody will see, besides us, obviously, first responders. But I feel like there's a narrative here that's working on our entire legal basis, which is reasonable. What do you feel this film kind of implies about the way that we have almost set up a thinking process which argues that there's got to be a lawyer standing on this side and one on that side and arguing the facts of the case? Do you think, what sort of implications do you see there?
I'll repeat the question if people didn't hear it. There's a compliment on the film, and then the question was, has the idea of reasonable doubt impacted the thought process to make it so that there seems we have to have an opponent on either side of the debate?
Well, I think, unfortunately, the media is presenting it as if there are two sides again. It's the Earth is round, the Earth is flat. But that is the problem. It's a really tricky problem where the media is so used to presenting two sides. I think for the scientists, that they look at the world through these skeptical eyes. They're always questioning. They're not necessarily great on television. They're not meant to be on television. Thank God they're out there working 80 hours a week to do the science. I know I couldn't do that for 1 hour a week. But their brains are asking questions. They're not outselling, and they're up against these PR reps who are like lawyers who have to win a case regardless of the facts. And somebody's saying, I just did a Q&A earlier tonight, and someone said, don't we need PR people who can help convince the world that climate change is real. And I think the advantage that these guys have is they don't necessarily have to say the truth. They just have to, as Richard Berman, who came up with Citizens for Consumer Freedom, had said when he was recorded without him knowing in Colorado in front of an energy conference, he said, we can either lose pretty or win ugly, and we can attack people, we can go after them, we don't need facts. So they're playing with a sort of a different hand. They're just trying to delay the obvious. The scientists are talking about real information, so it's an unbalanced field.
Is there still a question over here?
In the film, you are talking about all these other sort of groups and corporations or lobbyists or things that are also sort of trying to cast doubt across legislation attacking their product or group. How did you settle on climate change deniers? Why that one in particular? Why that sort of issue?
Well, first of all, I'll repeat the question in case people didn't hear. There's so many PR deniers out there. What made you settle on climate change as the ones to expose?
Yeah, I think on some levels, I think of this film as more about the playbook than it is about climate change. That it works from tobacco, it works in flame retardants. We could have done pharmaceuticals, certainly food. I saw that, and Food Inc. was all about how to hide the facts and the lack of transparency. But today, the biggest payday of them all is energy. That's where the money is. So that these guys tend to gravitate to where the money is. If the money were someplace else, they'd be there. And also I think the consequences of climate are pretty incredibly important. But I don't think of it as being about climate as much as the ultimate playbook campaign is now centered around climate. And again, like tobacco, what's so fascinating is the science is totally clear. But today in the paper it was Krugman's talking about how they're defending certain food products in schools. It's just like the tobacco. I mean, you see the playbook over and over, no matter what the sort of field is. And hopefully, as Ian Swiss says, once revealed, never concealed, that people will start to hear the same patterns over and over again and recognize them.
Question in front?
Yeah, wonderful film, and my concern is we have so little information out in the world, and this kind of a documentary truly exposes the quality of Arclight being completely manipulated and being used effectively but deceitfully. There's no check and balance on that, especially for the average consumer, who really, unless they do an enormous amount of research, equivalent to the scientists, will never really know how to navigate themselves through the complexity. Even the scientists talk about it. So my concern with all of this, and I'm very much in the spirit of the film, but my concern is I really worry that people are easily led by the hyperbolic, the accelerated attack model with very little counterbalance. And so my question, I guess, to you is in teaching this film, which I will do, what then do we say to everyone after we watch it? After we said, fabulous, wow, I learned so much, what's the next step for the average person who doesn't really know? You said earlier, critical thinking. It's not that people don't want to think critically. They, haven't been given a lot of permission to do it. They don't have a lot of time for it. Where's the next step?
Well, for the people in the back who might not have heard, the question was, the film shows there seems to be so few checks and balances for the people manipulating the media. What can those of us who might want to teach this film tell viewers after watching it?
Well, first of all, I think that, that it's all not, I think people are capable of changing. That, on one hand, I think that in the film we talk about three groups. There's the, obviously the moneyed interests that will do everything to defend their product, whatever it is. There's the ideological factor that gives cover to that money interest, which is we're fighting for freedom, we're fighting for democracy. And then there's that tribal aspect that Michael Shermer talked about, which is, you know, if Al Gore thinks one thing, we think the other. I think that tribe is capable of changing. We see what happened with gay rights. You know, every Republican was against it in 08, and today it becomes an acceptable factor. We see in climate change, the New York Times did a poll, 48% of Republicans think we should have legislation around climate change. So these things can move. They're not set in stone. There are occasional days where I have optimism about this, and that it can happen. And I think, again, I think it's how information is presented, and it's not only Fox News that's presenting it. It was major newspapers that are changing, and television stations. They're starting to change, and I think as they change, people will realize this is not an ideological issue. Perhaps the solutions might be. But we can begin the real debate, which is what are we going to do about it. But I also think, as you see the same group that will be out there constantly, we're going to be attacked as whatever, that's going to come with the territory. But they're going to, I think as those people are out there, hopefully we will see when you hear the word freedom, when you hear the word jobs, the right to work for the coal industry and live in those wonderful towns in West Virginia where they don't have any, running water or whatever it is. That's what we're fighting for. That's the American way. Obama was talking about the miracle of clean coal in 08 along with McCain. Hopefully we can stop the Democrats as well as the Republicans for not just giving, into those little cliches. And I did a panel the other night with James Hansen, and he said, it's the liberals' fault that we haven't had more action on climate, which I thought was an interesting twist. And he said, we need carbon tax, and we need a revenue-neutral carbon tax right away. And we can't mess it up by saying money should go back to the government, because we're not going to get a right-wing, Republican audience to join in that. But we need this carbon tax, and the money can go back to the taxpayer. So I think there are solutions that will appeal to a right-wing audience, and Bob Inglis is convinced that the vast majority of people in Congress think this is totally true. They're just waiting for their constituencies, who are beginning to catch up pretty quickly.
Are there any more questions?
Yes, the middle. I was just wondering whether in your research you saw evidence of, the moneyed interests are specifically now in states going after attorney generals, which have to do with regulations, etc. And they've done well as far as governors are concerned. There's more and more of them who have been impacted. And then one last question is about Mr. Taylor, who's been going around. They've been rolling back a lot of the advancements that have been made in alternative energies and solar, etc. And they're winning on that. And what did you sense about those things?
Did you do any research about the attorney generals, and what did you discover?
Well, I'm going to do the second part of the question, which is James Taylor and sort of rolling back solar issues across the country. One of the things that we filmed that didn't make it in the film was a lady who was one of the originators of the Tea Party. And she's in Georgia and was upset that that a farmer cannot put solar panels on his property and sell the excess energy. And things like that are happening in Florida, numbers of states, and ALEC, which is one of the groups, and the Kochs, and a number of others are defending this, and they're calling it the Electric Freedom Act to stop you from being able to sell, buy solar panels and sell the excess solar. So there's real strong attempts, but I'm thinking, in most local areas, Republicans and Democrats are sort of out to get these things to happen. Republican mayors in coastal towns in Florida see these things as problems. So, in individual areas, I think things can change. And some right-wing groups are thinking, wait a second, there's a certain hypocrisy that people who hate regulations are trying to create new regulations to stop you from having choice. So hopefully we can stop ALEC with the Electric Freedom Act. Again, there's always the word consumer and the word freedom that are in all these groups.
In the green sweater.
making the film, have you seen any change in message framing by some of the more center or left wing think tanks like Center for American Progress and things like that? Do you see anything coming out from those groups?
Have they changed their tactics since you made the film?
Well, first of all, we just opened yesterday. And if you like it, please tell your friends, and if you really hate it, and tell your friends to come here and see it as well. So hopefully we'll get people, and hopefully that will help bring about change. I think they're certainly a little nervous about it. There's been a lot of buzzing around the internet over this. But, you know, there's still too much self-interest. I mean, they're ultimately there just to confuse people. As you saw that Cato report, you know, they're not there to sort of debate the facts. They're there to, you know, so I think what we have to do is go after the people who are voting and the media who's representing that information. Those think tanks are not necessarily going to change. Though Michael Shermer, who said this is disgraceful, he works with Cato. So he became upset by it. So you are capable of changing certain individuals who are there who ultimately might be thoroughly conservative, but they still are offended by some of the tactics.
All the way on the side?
Yeah, I'm just going to ask, don't you think maybe framing it as a moral issue is probably one of the keys to getting through the garbage?
Is framing it as a moral issue key to getting it through the garbage?
Well, I think, you know, Bob Inglis certainly did that in a very persuasive way at the end, and we were moved by that. You know, I think I find that moving. You know, listen, the Pope is now going to come out and do this, and that's going to be a really strong factor. You know, it's sort of not what the Catholic Church has talked about. And now they're changing, and the Pope sees this as a major moral issue. And I think that's going to start to have an effect. And it is, you know, an incredible issue. And James Hansen was saying his research that he's about to publish a major paper, that it's much more frightening than he had ever imagined. But he didn't want to reveal, but it's going to be coming out soon. And, you know, it's scary, and it is a giant moral issue. And but, you know, like with the civil rights movement, which was a moral issue, you didn't go after the deniers. You didn't go to Bull Connor in the South and say you have to change. You showed images of why this is, you know, this is morally incorrect, and ultimately you brought people around. Hopefully we can do it quickly.
Is there another one on this side? The purple?
I've been trying to figure out how to word this question the whole night long. I was really fascinated by the ExxonMobil Russia deal and the Arctic discovery searching and all that sort of stuff, and the framing of it around the idea that all this science that they've been denying, they actually are now making billions and billions of dollars on it, you know. And I wonder if you think in 50 years there will be a documentary made about, similar to how the cigarette industry, you know, documents got leaked that they knew way back in the 60s that all this was addictive and cancer causing. If they're actually relying on the science that they're debunking to make profit, and that's where the investment in all this debunking comes from.
So could it be that they're relying on the science they're debunking, and might we find out in another 50 years that they knew more?
Well, we know now. The question was about Exxon and the deal to drill in the Arctic. We know now that they knew. As Stan Glantz, the tobacco man, said, these are multi-billion-dollar companies, and they have the best internal science that there is. The problem is it's hard to get documents out of the oil company. You know, Stan was very lucky that he got these delivered to him. The problem in the oil companies is people have a ton of money that comes to them with their non-disclosure agreement, so people are very reluctant to talk. But Steve Cole, who wrote a book on Exxon, spoke to one of the managers who said, we totally know what's coming and we're totally planning for it. And that's where the deal in the Arctic came from. So I think this is something that these companies ultimately have great internal science. They care about science. They need it to make money. So I do think they know it. Someone asked me if those guys standing up there and denying that tobacco is addictive is the image of the tobacco war. What's the image of the this climate war? And I think seeing Inhofe throwing snowballs, it's one that will probably be replayed many years from now.
So we only have time for 2 more questions. Did you have one in the back still?
Yeah, I have a big movie, Robbie, and I had a question about the price of the gas or the oil right now. How is that going to impact the momentum for?
How the price of gas impact the momentum?
Well, it slows things down ultimately. As gas and oil becomes cheaper, people are less concerned. And I think what we need is, as George Shultz, Reagan's Secretary of State, said, we need incentives. We need to price this product properly. We need to put the real cost on carbon. And until we have that, the capitalist system will not really work. And he said that the thing that made he and Ronald Reagan most proud when Shultz was Reagan's Secretary of State was putting through the International Ozone Treaty. That was something where you need regulations to make it work. And I think, if we price gas and coal properly, and both got rid of subsidies and charge for the cost of what it's doing to our health and what it's doing to our planet, we would be moving to green energies a lot faster than we are.
For our last question, do you still have one?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
you show in the film the CEOs of the cigarette companies swearing that they did not know that it was
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you.
You state in the film, you show the heads of the cigarette companies saying that swearing that cigarettes is not addictive. And then it turned out later that they knew all along. Why weren't any of these people sued for perjury or for lying to Congress?
Why weren't the cigarette CEOs who swore they didn't know they were cancerous and addictive prosecuted for perjury?
Well, I asked Stan Glantz, the man who got the tobacco papers, were these guys lying? And he said, I've learned enough from my lawyer not to say what they were thinking, He said, I can tell you they absolutely had the information. And actually one of the characters that we filmed with that didn't make it in the film, had figured out the addiction back in I think it was the 60s or 70s. And when he figured it out, he brought the heads of the tobacco company to see his research, and one of the heads of the company said, so this means it's addictive? And his lawyer stepped in between them and said, don't answer that question. And then this guy was flown to New York, and when he came back a few hours later, the place was dismantled. The rats were taken away, the cables were cut and sliced, and they made a point of not knowing. I don't know why they're not in jail, but as we saw in this film, a judge has finally said they have to take out ads saying they lied. That's a good start, though tobacco's still selling a lot of cigarettes, and it's killing unbelievable amounts of people. So they're still doing a good job, but it's, you don't go to your country club and brag about being a tobacco executive anymore. And hopefully that will be true for the energy companies. But more about the playbook itself, that at least the press will start to question things. I want to just say before we finish that I'm lucky enough to have many of the people who made this film that are here tonight. Melissa Robledo and Kim Roberts and John and Brian and why don't you guys stand up for a second? They did an awesome job. Come on, you guys. Thank you. Very exciting.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Kenner, and thank you all for coming to see Emergence of Doubt. Thanks a lot.